The handcuffs felt cold against Ethan Caldwell's wrists. 32 years old. Billionaire. Father. And in less than 3 hours, his perfect life had collapsed into rubble. Federal agents swarmed his Manhattan headquarters while cameras flashed outside. His wife, the woman he'd trusted with everything, had vanished. Billions were gone. His company's servers were bleeding classified data straight to the FBI. But the worst part? The woman who'd just destroyed him had been sleeping beside him for 2 years, and he'd never suspected a thing. This is a story about power, deception, and a revenge so calculated it turned an entire empire to ash. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Waldorf Astoria's grand ballroom glittered like something out of a fever dream. Crystal chandeliers the size of compact cars hung from gilded ceilings, throwing fractured light across marble floors polished to a mirror shine. 700 of Manhattan's most powerful people, the kind who measured their worth in congressional votes and offshore accounts, mingled beneath them, champagne flutes catching the light like tiny daggers. Ethan Caldwell stood near the main stage, one hand adjusting his Tom Ford cufflinks, the other resting lightly on his wife's lower back. Victoria looked stunning tonight. She always did. Her midnight blue Valentino gown hugged her frame perfectly, the fabric catching light in ways that made photographers actually stop and stare. Her dark hair was pulled back in a style that cost more than most people's monthly rent. And those emerald earrings, the ones he'd given her on their first anniversary, caught the chandelier light just right. "You're staring," Victoria said without looking at him. Her voice carried that particular mix of amusement and warning that he'd learned meant she was aware of every camera pointed their direction. "Can't help it," Ethan said. "You're the most beautiful woman in this room." Flattery. She turned slightly, her lips curving into something that could pass for a smile in photographs, but didn't quite reach her eyes. "You save that energy for your speech." Across the ballroom, Senator Mitchell raised his glass in their direction. Ethan returned the gesture. The senator was 3 scandals deep and counting, but he chaired the Armed Services Committee, which meant Ethan needed him friendly. Politics was a game of managing monsters, and Ethan had gotten very good at it. "Nervous?" Victoria asked. "About what? I've given 100 of these speeches. This one's different." Her fingers found his, squeezed once. "The defense contract announcement. Everyone's watching." She wasn't wrong. Caldwell Technologies had just secured a $12 billion government contract, the kind of deal that made or broke dynasties. At 32, Ethan was the youngest CEO to land something this big. The pressure had been crushing for months, but tonight was supposed to be a victory lap, a chance to remind everyone why they'd bet on him in the first place. His daughter Lily was home with the nanny, probably already asleep. 7 years old and already smarter than half the people in this room. She'd asked him this morning why he had to go to another boring party, and he'd promised her they'd go to the Natural History Museum this weekend. Just the two of them. No phones, no meetings, no interruptions. That promise felt important now, though he couldn't say why. "Mr. Caldwell?" A young staffer appeared at his elbow, tablet in hand. "They're ready for you in 5 minutes." Ethan nodded. The kid disappeared back into the crowd. Victoria's hand slipped from his. "I need to powder my nose before you go up there. Can't have the cameras catching me with shiny skin." "You're perfect," Ethan said. "That's the idea." She kissed his cheek, light, careful not to leave a mark, and vanished into the crowd with the kind of grace that came from years of practice. Ethan watched her go, then turned his attention to the notes on his phone. The speech was already loaded in the teleprompter, but he liked to review the key points. Control the message, control the outcome. That's what his first mentor had taught him, back when Caldwell Technologies was just 3 guys in a garage with more ambition than sense. 5 minutes became 4, then 3. Ethan stepped toward the stage, nodding at familiar faces. Congresswoman Yates. 3 different hedge fund managers whose names he could never quite remember. Marcus Chen from The Times, who'd written a puff piece about Ethan last month that made him sound like a cross between Elon Musk and Mother Teresa. The crowd was thinning near the stage, people finding their seats. Ethan scanned for Victoria automatically. She'd want to be visible when the cameras started rolling, but didn't spot her in the immediate vicinity, probably still in the restroom. These events ran long, and she'd learned to time her exits strategically. Ladies and gentlemen, the MC's voice boomed across the sound system. Please welcome Ethan Caldwell, founder and CEO of Caldwell Technologies. Applause rolled across the ballroom like thunder. Ethan climbed the steps, muscle memory taking over. Smile, wave. Don't squint at the lights. The teleprompter glowed in front of him, and he launched into the speech without thinking. Thank you all for being here tonight. When I started Caldwell Technologies 8 years ago, I had a simple vision: to build technology that doesn't just change markets, it protects lives. The words flowed easily. He'd practiced this version 40 times, tweaking phrases until they landed just right. The audience was engaged, heads nodding at the right moments. Senator Mitchell was actually paying attention instead of scrolling through his phone, which meant the speech was working. Ethan was 3 minutes in when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. Never check your phone during a speech. It looked weak, distracted. But then it buzzed again and again. Something cold twisted in his gut. And that's why this contract represents more than just business, Ethan continued, his voice steady even as his mind started racing. It represents a commitment to the men and women who serve this country, to give them the tools they need to come home safely. Another buzz. Then his Apple Watch lit up with notifications. He couldn't see the content without looking down, but the sheer volume was wrong. This wasn't normal. His eyes swept the crowd again, searching for Victoria. Still no sign of her. The speech was supposed to run 12 minutes. Ethan cut it to 8, wrapping up with a joke about government efficiency that landed well enough to cover his exit. More applause, more cameras. He shook hands with the MC and descended the stage, already pulling his phone from his pocket. 17 missed calls, 9 texts, all from his head of security. The most recent one made his blood turn to ice. Sir, we have a situation. Victoria's missing. Ballroom security footage has been erased. Need you in the command center now. Ethan's first thought was kidnapping. His second was ransom. His third, the one that made his hands shake, was Lily. If someone had taken Victoria to get to him, his daughter could be next. He moved through the ballroom like a shark through water, fast but controlled. People tried to stop him, to congratulate him, to network. He brushed past them with practiced apologies. His security chief, Marcus, appeared from nowhere and fell into step beside him. Talk, Ethan said. Mrs. Caldwell left the ballroom approximately 18 minutes ago, Marcus said, his voice low. She told the coat check attendant she was stepping outside for air. 2 minutes later, the attendant noticed the surveillance monitors had gone black. When they came back online, the last 20 minutes of footage was gone, professionally wiped. What about her phone? Disconnected. We tried the tracking app you installed. It's been disabled. Ethan's jaw clenched. He'd put that tracker on Victoria's phone after a business rival had made some veiled threats last year. She'd laughed about it, called him paranoid. Now the paranoia looked justified, except it was coming from entirely the wrong direction. They reached the security office, a small room behind the ballroom's main kitchen. Banks of monitors showed camera feeds from across the hotel, but the ones covering the main entrance and side exits were conspicuously dark. How long until those come back online? Ethan demanded. Already working on it, said the hotel's head of security, a nervous man in an ill-fitting suit. But whoever did this knew what they were doing. This isn't some kid with a laptop. This is professional-grade stuff. Ethan's phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but answered anyway. Ethan Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell, this is Agent Sarah Reeves with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We need you to come to your office immediately. It's urgent. The world tilted slightly. I'm dealing with a personal emergency right now. Sir, I understand your wife is missing, Agent Reeves cut in, her voice sharp. That's actually why we need you at your office. Now. We've been monitoring unusual activity in your company's servers for the past hour. Large transfers, data breaches. And about 10 minutes ago, someone started accessing files that are supposed to be classified at the highest levels. Ethan felt his knees go weak. What kind of transfers? The kind that involve 9-figure sums disappearing from accounts you told the SEC didn't exist. The line went dead. Ethan stared at his phone, trying to process what he'd just heard. 9 figures, hidden accounts. His mind raced through possibilities, trying to find an explanation that didn't end with him in handcuffs. Sir? Marcus looked concerned. What did they say? Get the car, Ethan said. We're going to the office. What about Mrs. Caldwell? She's at the office. Ethan didn't know how he knew, but he was suddenly certain. That's where she's been heading this whole time. The drive from the Waldorf to Caldwell Technologies headquarters should have taken 20 minutes in Manhattan traffic. Marcus made it in 12, running 2 red lights and using the horn like a weapon. Ethan spent the entire ride trying to call Victoria's phone, his parents, his lawyer, anyone who might have answers. Nothing but disconnected numbers and voicemails. Caldwell Tower rose 70 stories above Midtown, all glass and steel ambition. Ethan had designed it himself, insisted on the open floor plan and the rooftop garden and the ridiculous art installation in the lobby that cost more than most people's houses. It was supposed to be a monument to everything he'd built. Now it looked like a tomb. Federal vehicles surrounded the building's entrance. Black SUVs with government plates, cops directing traffic, agents and windbreakers swarming like ants. Ethan's stomach dropped. This wasn't a quiet investigation. This was a raid. Marcus pulled to a stop at the police barricade. An FBI agent immediately approached the car, hand on his weapon. "Step out of the vehicle, Mr. Caldwell." Ethan complied, hands visible, moving slowly. He'd seen enough people get shot for making sudden movements around nervous cops. The night air felt sharp against his skin, cutting through his tuxedo like it was made of tissue paper. Agent Reeves appeared from the crowd. She was younger than he'd expected from her voice, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and the kind of professional demeanor that came from seeing too much and trusting too little. "Mr. Caldwell, I need you to come with me. I want my lawyer. You'll want him more after you see what we found." She gestured toward the building. "This way." They walked through the lobby, past the expensive art, past the reception desk where Emma usually sat with her eternal smile, past the security checkpoint that now housed 3 additional agents reviewing access logs. The elevator ride to the 68th floor felt like descending into hell in reverse. Ethan's private office occupied the entire floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Manhattan that real estate agents literally salivated over. His desk was hand-carved walnut, imported from Italy. The chairs cost $8,000 each. Everything in this room was designed to project power, control, permanence. Now it was crawling with FBI agents, photographing everything, boxing up files, imaging hard drives. Agent Reeves led him to his desk, where a laptop sat open. His laptop, specifically, the one with the biometric lock that was supposed to be unhackable. "Recognize this?" she asked. "It's mine." "Good. Because 45 minutes ago, someone used it to authorize wire transfers totaling $860 million from 7 different offshore accounts registered under shell corporations that all trace back to you." Ethan's mouth went dry. "That's impossible. I've been at a charity gala all night, hundreds of witnesses." "We're aware." Agent Reeves pulled up a window on the laptop. "Which is why we're very interested in the digital signature attached to these transactions. The authentication came from your personal devices, phone, laptop, and security key, all 3. And according to our forensics team, the commands were entered manually, not automated." "I didn't do this." "Then who did?" Ethan opened his mouth to say he didn't know, then stopped. Because he did know. Or at least, he knew who had access to all his devices. Who knew his passwords because he'd been stupid enough to trust her with them. Who had been by his side for 2 years, learning every detail of his security systems, his business operations, his secret arrangements. "Victoria," he whispered. Agent Reeves nodded slowly. "Your wife?" "Yes. We'd like to talk to her about that, along with about 40 other things we've uncovered in the past hour." She pulled out a tablet, swiped through several documents, then held it out to him. The header read, "Classified, eyes only." "Recognize these?" Ethan's vision blurred as he scanned the pages. They were internal memos from Caldwell Technologies' Defense Division. Memos about product specifications, testing results, safety margins. Memos he'd written himself, buried in encrypted folders that required 3 levels of authorization to access. But it was the highlighted sections that made his blood turn to ice. Critical structural failure identified in mounting bracket assembly. Recommend immediate recall. Safety testing shows 34% failure rate under combat conditions. Do not release to production until resolved. Legal advises classifying as trade secret to prevent disclosure requirements. Those memos were 5 years old. From before the government contract, before the company went public, before everything. Where did you get these? Ethan demanded. Your wife uploaded them to a secure server approximately 30 minutes ago, Agent Reeves said, along with financial records showing you deliberately suppressed safety data to win the defense contract, and communications with Senator Mitchell arranging bribes in exchange for his committee's approval. That's not... I never... Ethan couldn't form complete sentences. His brain was shutting down, retreating from a reality too awful to process. Mr. Caldwell, I need you to sit down. I want my lawyer. Now. Of course, but first... Agent Reeves nodded to someone behind him. Ethan turned to find 2 more agents approaching, one of them holding handcuffs. Ethan Caldwell, you're under arrest for fraud, corruption, bribery of a federal official, and conspiracy to commit manslaughter in connection with... This is insane, Ethan's voice cracked. Victoria set me up. She's been planning this. The death of Mark Bennett, whose body was found outside this building 4 years ago. The name hit Ethan like a physical blow. Mark Bennett, the engineer who'd threatened to go public with safety concerns, the one who'd supposedly jumped from the 42nd floor after being fired for insubordination. Except he hadn't been fired. Ethan had personally approved his severance package, tried to keep things quiet, tried to make it all go away without lawyers and investigations and media coverage. But suicide? No. Mark Bennett had been planning to testify before a congressional committee. People with plans didn't jump. I didn't kill him, Ethan said, his voice barely audible. I didn't kill anyone. Then you'll have a chance to prove that in court. The handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Cold metal, sharp edges. The kind of thing that happened to other people, criminals, failures. Not to Ethan Caldwell, not to the golden boy of Silicon Alley, not to the man who'd built an empire from nothing. Wait. Ethan's mind was racing now, trying to find purchase on anything solid. Mark Bennett, did he have family? Agent Reeves consulted her tablet. A younger sister, Claire Bennett. She was interviewed after his death but never pursued the case. Why? Claire Bennett. The name meant nothing to Ethan. He'd never met Mark's sister, never even knew he had one. But suddenly he was thinking about Victoria's background, the story she'd told him when they met. Orphaned young, no siblings, built her career from scratch through pure determination. What if that was a lie? What if everything was a lie? I need to make a call, Ethan said. You'll get your phone call at the station. They led him toward the elevator, past agents still photographing his office, past the windows that showed Manhattan glittering below like a circuit board. Ethan's reflection caught in the glass, disheveled, handcuffed, destroyed. He didn't recognize the man staring back at him. The elevator doors opened. Ethan stepped inside, flanked by agents. As the doors began to close, he caught a glimpse of his desk one last time. Sitting on top of it, perfectly centered, was Victoria's wedding ring. She'd left it there deliberately. A message. A final "fuck you" before disappearing. The elevator descended, and with it, Ethan's entire world collapsed into darkness. Ethan spent the next 6 hours in an interrogation room that smelled like stale coffee and broken dreams. His lawyer, Gerald Morrison, who charged $1,000 an hour and had gotten 3 senators off corruption charges, sat beside him looking increasingly worried. Don't say anything, Gerald kept repeating. Not until we've reviewed everything they have. But Ethan couldn't stop talking. He needed them to understand that Victoria had done this, that she'd manipulated everything, that he was the victim here. My wife has access to all my passwords, he told Agent Reeves for the 4th time. She could have logged into those accounts. She could have uploaded those files. Why would she? Agent Reeves asked. What's her motive? I don't know. That's what you need to find out. Mr. Caldwell, let's talk about Mark Bennett again. Our investigation shows he discovered critical safety flaws in your defense technology. He tried to report them through proper channels. And 3 days later, he was dead. His sister filed a wrongful death claim, but it was dismissed due to lack of evidence. Did you ever meet Claire Bennett? No? Never. I didn't even know Mark had a sister until tonight. Gerald touched his arm. Don't answer that. But Agent Reeves was already pulling up new documents on her laptop. This is interesting. We've been digging into Victoria Hale's background. And you know what? It's remarkably clean. Almost too clean. No childhood photos, no school friends who remember her. Her college transcripts check out, but the people who supposedly taught her don't recall a Victoria Hale. Ethan's stomach clenched. What are you saying? I'm saying your wife might not be who she claims to be. And given the timing of everything, Mark Bennett's death 4 years ago, Victoria entering your life 3 years ago, I'm starting to wonder if someone rebuilt themselves specifically to destroy you. The room spun. Ethan gripped the table to steady himself. That's impossible, he whispered. We dated for a year before getting married. I vetted her. My security team vetted her. She had references, business partners, a whole history, and all of which could be manufactured with enough time and resources, Agent Reeves said. Identity reconstruction isn't that hard if you know what you're doing. Change your appearance, create a paper trail, hire actors to play former colleagues. It's been done before. But why? Why go through all that just to... Ethan stopped, the answer crystallizing in his mind with horrible clarity. Her brother. If Victoria is really Claire Bennett, if Mark was her brother, then she spent 4 years planning revenge against the man she blames for his death, Agent Reeves finished. And from where I'm sitting, she did a pretty thorough job. Gerald was already on his phone, barking orders at his assistants. I need complete background checks on Victoria Hale going back 20 years, school records, employment history, fingerprints, DNA if you can get it, and find out everything about Claire Bennett. Photos, current whereabouts, known associates, move. Ethan barely heard him. His mind was replaying every moment with Victoria, every conversation, every intimate detail. The way she'd asked questions about his business, his security systems, his relationships with powerful people. He thought she was being supportive, interested in his work. She'd been gathering intelligence. The trip to Miami where they'd met, had that been random? Or had she engineered the entire encounter, knowing he'd be at that specific conference, studying his preferences until she became exactly the kind of woman he'd notice? Their first date. She'd chosen the restaurant, a quiet Italian place downtown. He thought it was charming. Now he wondered if she'd picked it because it had no security cameras. Their wedding. Small, intimate, just close friends and family. His family. Because Victoria claimed to have no one left, that she was alone in the world. Another lie to explain why no one from her past could be questioned. I need to see my daughter, Ethan said suddenly. Lily, if Victoria was planning this, if she's really been Claire Bennett this whole time, she might... Your daughter is safe, Agent Reeves cut in. We have agents at your residence. The nanny confirmed Lily's asleep in her room, no signs of disturbance. Relief washed through him, followed immediately by a new wave of panic. Victoria knew where Lily was. She had access to the house, to the security codes, to everything. What if she... We've changed all the codes, Agent Reeves said, and we have protective custody arranged if it becomes necessary. Right now, your daughter is the last thing you need to worry about. She's the only thing I need to worry about, Ethan snapped. Everything else is it's just money. But Lily... His voice cracked. He couldn't finish the sentence. Gerald squeezed his shoulder. We're going to fix this, Ethan, but right now you need to focus on what you can control, and that means giving these agents everything they need to find Victoria. She's gone, Ethan said flatly. People who plan this carefully don't stick around to get caught. She's probably in another country by now. New name, new phase, new life. Maybe, Agent Reeves said, or maybe she made a mistake. People usually do, eventually, and when she does, we'll find her. But Ethan knew better. Victoria, Claire, whoever she really was, hadn't made mistakes. Not in 2 years of marriage. Not in however many years she'd spent preparing for this. She'd thought of everything, planned for every contingency. Except one. The diamond, Ethan said suddenly. The yellow diamond necklace I gave her on our anniversary. She was wearing it tonight. Did you find it? Agent Reeves frowned. No, why? Because it's worth $3 million, and Victoria never went anywhere without it. She loved that necklace. His mind was racing now, trying to find an angle, any leverage. If she left it behind, that means she didn't care about the money. This was never about money. So what was it about? Justice. The word tasted bitter. She thinks I killed her brother, and she decided to make me pay for it by destroying everything I've built. Did you? Agent Reeves asked quietly. Kill Mark Bennett? Ethan met her eyes. No, I didn't. But I covered up the fact that our technology had problems. I buried safety reports because I wanted the government contract, and Mark died trying to expose that. So maybe I didn't push him off that balcony, but I'm not innocent either. Gerald inhaled sharply. Ethan, as your attorney, I strongly advise you not to. I'm tired of lying, Ethan said. I spent 4 years lying to myself about what happened to Mark Bennett, telling myself it was suicide, that I had nothing to do with it, but Victoria's right. My ambition got him killed. Maybe not directly, but it's still my fault. The room fell silent. Agent Reeves studied him with something that might have been respect. Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Caldwell. It doesn't change the charges against you, but it does tell me you're not completely irredeemable. She closed her laptop. We're done here for tonight. You'll be processed and held pending arraignment. Your lawyer can argue for bail, but given the severity of the charges and your obvious flight risk, I wouldn't count on it. They led Ethan out of the interrogation room, down a hallway that smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation. The processing took another 2 hours. Fingerprints, photos, paperwork. Gerald stayed by his side the entire time, making calls, filing motions, building a defense. But Ethan barely noticed. His mind was stuck on one image, Victoria's face the last time he'd seen her, right before she'd left the ballroom. That slight smile, that careful kiss on his cheek. She'd known. Even then, she'd known exactly what was about to happen. And she'd looked satisfied, like someone who'd just completed a very difficult task. The cell they put him in was small, concrete, depressing. Ethan sat on the thin mattress and stared at the wall. Somewhere in the building, agents were hunting for Victoria. Somewhere in Manhattan, his daughter was sleeping, unaware that her father's life had just imploded. Somewhere in the world, the woman he'd loved was probably celebrating. He'd lost everything in less than 12 hours. And the worst part? He deserved it. Not because he'd killed Mark Bennett, he hadn't, but because he'd been so arrogant, so convinced of his own brilliance, that he'd never considered someone might be smart enough to beat him at his own game. Victoria had studied him, learned him, become exactly what he wanted so completely that he'd never questioned whether it was real. That was genius. That was terrifying. That was revenge. Ethan closed his eyes and tried to remember the last genuinely happy moment in his life. Before Victoria. Before the government contract. Before everything turned poisonous. He thought of Lily, 5 years old, laughing as he pushed her on the swings in Central Park, her small hand in his. Her absolute trust that Daddy would always be there to catch her. He'd failed her, just like he'd failed Mark Bennett, just like he'd failed everyone who'd believed in him. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Ethan lay back on the mattress and stared at the ceiling, trying to imagine a future where any of this could be fixed. He couldn't, because somewhere out there, Victoria Hale had disappeared into the world with $800 million, classified government secrets, and the satisfaction of having destroyed the man who'd destroyed her family. And Ethan Caldwell, the youngest CEO on Wall Street, the billionaire who'd had it all, was lying in a jail cell wondering how he'd been stupid enough to marry his own executioner. 5 years earlier, Victoria Hale didn't exist. The woman who would eventually destroy Ethan Caldwell was sitting in a studio apartment in Brooklyn, staring at her brother's death certificate and trying to decide whether revenge was worth becoming someone else entirely. Claire Bennett was 25 years old. She had an economics degree from NYU, student loans she'd be paying off until she was 40, and a brother who'd been dead for exactly 6 days. The medical examiner had ruled it suicide. The police had closed the case. Caldwell Technologies' lawyers had sent a condolence card with a severance check attached, like Mark's life could be reduced to numbers on a page. The check sat on her kitchen counter, uncashed, $30,000. Hush money disguised as compassion. Claire had burned it in her sink at 3 a.m, watching the smoke curl toward the ceiling while her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the lighter. Her phone buzzed. Another text from her mother, who'd retreated to her sister's place in Vermont and kept asking when Claire was coming to visit. As if geography could create distance from grief. As if moving to the mountains would somehow make Mark less dead. Claire didn't answer. She was too busy reading her brother's emails for the 100th time, the ones he'd sent her in the weeks before he died. The ones that explained exactly what he'd found at Caldwell Technologies and why he couldn't stay silent about it. The mounting brackets fail 1 out of 3 times under stress testing. Claire, these are going into helicopters. Military helicopters. If those brackets fail in combat, people die. And Caldwell knows. He fucking knows, and he's burying the reports because admitting the problem means losing the contract. Mark had been a good engineer, careful, detail-oriented, the kind of person who triple-checked his math because he understood that mistakes in his field meant body bags. When he discovered the defects, he'd gone through proper channels first, filed reports with his supervisor, requested meetings with the safety review board, followed every rule in the employee handbook. Caldwell Technologies had responded by offering him a promotion and a raise if he just stopped making noise about it. Mark had refused. He'd contacted a lawyer, started gathering documentation for a congressional hearing, told Claire he was going to expose the whole thing, consequences be damned. 3 days later, he'd supposedly jumped from the 42nd floor of Caldwell Tower. The police report said he'd been fired earlier that day for insubordination, that he'd seemed depressed lately, that coworkers had noticed him drinking more, sleeping less, showing signs of instability. All lies. Claire had talked to Mark the morning he died. He'd sounded excited, energized. He'd said his lawyer thought they had a real case, that congressional staffers were interested in his testimony. He'd promised to take Claire out for dinner to celebrate once it was all over. "We're going to win this one, sis. We're actually going to win." Those were the last words her brother ever said to her. Claire set down the emails and picked up a different folder. This one contained everything she'd been able to gather about Ethan Caldwell in the past week. News articles, LinkedIn profiles, society page photos, financial disclosures. The man was everywhere. This golden boy genius who'd built a tech empire before turning 30. He had a daughter, 7 years old, motherless after his first wife had died in a car accident. The media loved that angle. The devoted single father who balanced boardroom victories with bedtime stories. There were photos of him at charity galas, always impeccably dressed, always surrounded by people who looked at him like he was royalty. In one photo, he was laughing at something off camera, his whole face lit up with genuine amusement. He looked human, normal, not like someone who'd cover up safety defects and destroy whistleblowers. That's what made it so dangerous. Claire's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Detective Morris, the cop who'd investigated Mark's death. She'd called him 4 times this week, trying to get him to reopen the case. He'd been sympathetic but firm. No new evidence meant no new investigation. She let it go to voicemail. There was no point arguing with someone who'd already made up his mind. Instead, she opened her laptop and pulled up a file she'd created 3 days ago. It was titled Project Reconstruction, and it contained the beginnings of a plan so insane she still wasn't sure she'd actually go through with it. The idea had started simple. Gather evidence against Caldwell and take it to the media. Expose the cover-up. Force a real investigation. Make sure Mark's death meant something. But the more Claire researched, the more she realized that approach would fail. Caldwell had lawyers who could bury lawsuits for years, PR firms that could spin narratives, political connections that made him essentially untouchable through conventional channels. Going public would be like throwing pebbles at a tank. If she wanted to destroy Ethan Caldwell, she needed to get close enough that he'd never see the knife coming, which meant she needed to stop being Claire Bennett. The transformation would take years. Complete identity reconstruction wasn't something you could rush. She'd need new documents, a new history, a new face. She'd need to learn how to move in Caldwell's world, how to talk like the women he noticed, how to become someone he'd actually want. It seemed impossible. Claire was an economics grad with a Brooklyn accent and a wardrobe from Target. She didn't know the first thing about being a Manhattan socialite, but she had something more valuable than knowledge, motivation, and time, and a willingness to sacrifice everything that made her Claire Bennett if it meant making Ethan Caldwell pay for what he'd done. She opened a new document and started typing. Step 1. Disappear. Og. The woman who walked out of a Sao Paulo plastic surgery clinic 6 months later barely resembled Claire Bennett. The nose was smaller, more refined. The jawline had been softened. The lips were fuller. Nothing dramatic enough to look fake, but enough that facial recognition software would struggle to make a match. Claire stood in front of the hotel mirror, studying her new face with clinical detachment. The bruising had faded. The swelling was gone. This was who she was now. Someone else. someone who could walk past her own mother without being recognized. She'd chosen Brazil specifically because their plastic surgeons were world-class and their record-keeping was flexible. The clinic she'd used catered to people who needed discretion: criminals fleeing prosecution, victims escaping abusers, spies reinventing themselves. They didn't ask questions as long as the money cleared. Claire had paid with money she'd inherited from Mark: his 401k, his life insurance, everything he'd left behind. Blood money, converted into a new identity. The next 18 months were a blur of careful construction. She moved to London and enrolled in an executive MBA program under the name Victoria Hale, using forged transcripts from a small liberal arts college that had closed 5 years earlier. No one checked. No one cared. The tuition check cleared, and suddenly she was a legitimate business student with a documented academic history. She studied everything: corporate finance, strategic management, behavioral psychology, but the real education happened outside the classroom. She watched how wealthy women moved, how they spoke, how they held themselves. She hired an accent coach to sand away the Brooklyn edges from her voice, replacing them with the neutral sophistication of someone who'd grown up in international schools. She learned about wine, about art, about the social rituals that separated the truly wealthy from people just pretending. She discovered that being rich wasn't about money. It was about confidence. The unshakable belief that you belonged in every room you entered. Claire practiced that confidence in mirrors, at restaurants, in business meetings. She practiced until it felt real, until Victoria Hale became more natural than Claire Bennett had ever been. She also built Victoria's history. She created a consulting firm that existed only on paper, complete with a professional website and fake client testimonials. She hired actors to play former colleagues who'd vouch for her if anyone called for references. She manufactured a digital footprint going back years: social media posts, business articles, conference appearances. Every detail had to be perfect. One slip, one inconsistency, and the whole identity would collapse. The hardest part was the loneliness. Claire couldn't risk real friendships, real relationships. Everyone she met as Victoria was part of the performance. She went on dates with men she felt nothing for, just to practice being charming and unattainable. She attended networking events and smiled until her face hurt, building a reputation as someone impressive but slightly distant. At night, alone in whatever city she was living in that month, she'd look at photos of Mark and remind herself why she was doing this, why she'd given up her real name, her real face, her real life. Justice. That's what this was about. Not revenge, justice. She repeated that to herself often enough that she almost believed it. By the time Victoria Hale's business visa allowed her to relocate to the United States, Claire had been gone for 3 years. The woman who returned to American soil bore almost no resemblance to the grieving sister who'd left. She was polished, sophisticated, successful, the kind of woman who could walk into a room of billionaires and belong there. She'd also spent those 3 years becoming an expert on exactly one subject: Ethan Caldwell. She knew his schedule, his habits, his preferences. She knew he attended the International Tech Summit in Miami every January. She knew he had a weakness for women who challenged him intellectually. She knew his first wife had died in a car accident and that he was still grieving, still lonely, still looking for someone who could understand both his ambition and his loss. Victoria Hale could be that person. Victoria Hale could be exactly what Ethan Caldwell needed. All she had to do was engineer a meeting that felt like fate. Thus, the Miami Beach Convention Center was packed with tech executives, all of them trying to network their way into the next big deal. Victoria navigated the crowd with practiced ease, her silk dress catching the light, her smile calibrated to appear interested but not desperate. She'd spent 2 weeks researching everyone who'd be at this summit. She knew which venture capitalists were looking for new investments, which CEOs were facing board challenges, which rising stars were worth cultivating relationships with. But there was only one person she was actually here to meet. Ethan Caldwell was giving a keynote on the future of defense technology. Victoria had read it already. She'd paid a conference organizer's assistant $2,000 for an advance copy. She knew exactly which points he'd make, which jokes he'd tell, which moments would reveal the man behind the CEO persona. She positioned herself in the audience where he'd see her, third row, aisle seat, directly in his sightline. She wore red because his ex-wife had always worn red in her photos. She kept her expression engaged but skeptical, like someone intelligent enough to question his assumptions. Ethan's speech was smooth, rehearsed, exactly what she'd expected. He talked about innovation and responsibility, about building technology that protected people instead of just enriching shareholders. The audience ate it up. They always did. But Victoria noticed the moments when his confidence slipped. When he touched his wedding ring, he still wore it, even 3 years after his wife's death. When his eyes swept the crowd looking for something, approval, connection, someone who understood what it cost to build an empire while raising a daughter alone, Victoria understood. She'd made it her job to understand. After the speech, there was a networking reception. Victoria timed her approach carefully, waiting until Ethan was between conversations, vulnerable to interruption. "Interesting speech," she said, appearing at his elbow with a glass of champagne. "Though I noticed you didn't mention the ethical implications of selling predictive algorithms to defense contractors." Ethan turned, surprised. Most people at these events led with compliments, not challenges. "That's a complex issue," he said carefully. "Everything worth discussing is complex." Victoria held his gaze. "I'm Victoria Hale. I run a consulting firm focused on corporate ethics and strategic positioning." "Ethics and strategy." Ethan smiled slightly. "Aren't those usually opposites?" "Only if you're doing it wrong." That caught his attention. He studied her more closely now, trying to figure her out. Victoria let him look. She'd designed this version of herself specifically to intrigue him. "You think I'm doing it wrong?" Ethan asked. "I think you're doing what every CEO does, making impossible choices and hoping the consequences land on someone else." Victoria took a sip of champagne. "But that speech you just gave suggested you actually care about those consequences. So either you're a better liar than most, or you're genuinely conflicted about what you're building." "And which do you think I am?" "I think you're both." Victoria set down her glass. "I also think this conversation is too interesting to have standing in a hotel ballroom. There's an art gallery 2 blocks from here that stays open until midnight. Contemporary pieces, very pretentious, perfect for continuing philosophical debates." She could see him calculating. This woman had just called him a liar and challenged his entire business model. She was beautiful, yes, but there were beautiful women at every conference. This was something different, someone who saw him clearly and wasn't impressed by the usual tricks. "I have a dinner meeting at 8, Ethan said. "Cancel it." Victoria smiled. Not flirtatiously. That would be too obvious. Just confident, sure of herself. "Unless you're afraid of having your assumptions challenged by someone who actually knows what they're talking about." Ethan laughed. "You're very direct." "Life's too short for games." Victoria picked up her clutch. "The gallery is called Meridian. I'll be there at 8:30. You should come." She walked away before he could respond, not looking back. The trick with men like Ethan was making them think they were chasing you, when really you'd already mapped out every step of the pursuit. Victoria left the convention center and walked the 2 blocks to Meridian Gallery. She'd been there twice already this week, memorizing the layout, the pieces, the stories behind each artist. She knew exactly which paintings would resonate with Ethan based on his social media likes and the art he'd collected for his office. At 8:40, he walked through the door. Victoria was standing in front of a massive abstract piece, all sharp angles and bleeding colors. She didn't turn around when Ethan approached, just kept studying the painting like it held answers to questions she hadn't asked yet. "You came," she said. "You were right. The dinner meeting was boring anyway." Ethan stopped beside her, looking at the painting. "What do you see?" "Chaos pretending to be structure, or maybe structure pretending to be chaos. I can't decide which is more honest." They talked for 3 hours. About art, about technology, about the weight of building something that outlasted you. Ethan told her about his daughter, about trying to be both parents when he had no idea what he was doing. Victoria told him carefully constructed lies about her own childhood, orphaned young, raised by an aunt who didn't want her, learning early that the only person you could rely on was yourself. Every word was designed to create connection. Every story revealed just enough vulnerability to make Ethan think he was seeing the real her. By the time they left the gallery, Ethan had asked for her number. Victoria had demurred. "I'm in town for 3 more days, then back to London for a month," creating artificial scarcity, making herself something he couldn't quite have. The next morning, he texted her, "Dinner tonight? I promise to challenge your assumptions about defense contractors." Victoria waited 4 hours before responding. Only if you promise not to bore me with the usual CEO nonsense. They had dinner, then breakfast, then lunch the next day. By the time Victoria's invented business trip required her to leave Miami, Ethan was already planning his next visit to London. The courtship took a year, long enough to feel real, long enough that Ethan never questioned whether Victoria's arrival in his life had been anything other than fortunate timing. She learned everything: his security codes, his bank passwords, the location of his offshore accounts, the names of every corrupt politician who owed him favors. She listened to him talk about Mark Bennett exactly once. Terrible situation. The kid seemed unstable. And she smiled and nodded and filed the information away for later. She met his daughter. That was the hardest part. Lily was sweet and smart and desperately wanted her father to be happy. She'd hugged Victoria the first time they met, this small 7-year-old trusting a complete stranger because her father said it was okay. Victoria had gone back to her hotel that night and vomited in the bathroom, hating herself for involving an innocent child in this. But she pushed through it. Lily wasn't the target. Ethan was. And sometimes collateral damage was unavoidable. They got married in a small ceremony in the Hamptons. Victoria wore white. Ethan cried during his vows. His friends told her how lucky she was, how wonderful Ethan was, how perfect they were together. Victoria smiled and agreed and started phase 2 of her plan. It took another year to copy everything. The financial records, the buried safety reports, the communications with Senator Mitchell about arranging bribes, the emails discussing Mark Bennett's problem in the weeks before his death, every piece of evidence she'd need to destroy Ethan completely. She worked slowly, carefully, never taking so much data that it would trigger alerts, never asking questions that would seem suspicious, just a wife who was interested in her husband's work, just a partner who wanted to understand his business. Ethan never suspected. Why would he? Victoria was perfect. She ran her own company. She was brilliant with Lily. She made him laugh. She understood the pressure he was under and never complained when work kept him late at the office. She was exactly what he needed, which made her the perfect weapon. The hardest moments were the quiet ones. Mornings when Ethan would kiss her forehead before leaving for work. Nights when they'd sit on the balcony drinking wine and talking about nothing important. Times when Victoria almost forgot she was pretending. Because the truth was, parts of Ethan were genuinely good. He loved his daughter fiercely. He donated millions to charity. He remembered his employees' birthdays and wrote personal thank you notes. He wasn't a cartoon villain. He was a complicated man who'd made terrible choices and convinced himself they were necessary. That made it harder and easier. Harder because Victoria had to watch herself not to forget why she was here. Easier because every time she felt herself softening, she'd remember Mark's voice on the phone that last morning. The excitement, the hope, the belief that doing the right thing would actually matter. And then she'd remember Mark's body being loaded into the medical examiner's van while Caldwell Technologies' lawyers circled like vultures, already shaping the narrative. Suicide. Unstable employee. Tragic, but not our fault. No. Victoria couldn't afford sympathy. Not when she was this close. 6 months before the charity gala, she started moving money. Small transfers at first, just testing the systems. Then larger amounts, always routing them through enough shell corporations that the trail would take months to untangle. She was careful never to touch the accounts at the same time of day, never to establish patterns. She'd studied financial crimes for 2 years specifically to learn how not to get caught. 3 months before the gala, she uploaded the first batch of classified files to an encrypted server. Evidence of the safety defects, proof that Ethan had known and buried the reports. Communications showing he'd pressured engineers to falsify testing data. 2 months before this gala, she created the Kill Switch, a program that would wipe her digital footprint from Caldwell Technologies' servers and simultaneously lock Ethan out of his own security systems. It would activate the night she disappeared, giving her hours to get away before anyone realized what had happened. 1 month before the gala, she contacted a journalist at the Washington Post. Anonymous tip, encrypted communication. She didn't send evidence yet, just enough to make them interested. Enough that when the full leak happened, they'd already be primed to run with it. 2 weeks before the gala, she visited Mark's grave for the first time in 4 years. The headstone was simple. Mark Bennett, beloved son and brother. The dates of his too short life. Nothing about how he'd died, nothing about why. Victoria stood there for an hour, not speaking, not crying, just existing in the space between who she'd been and who she'd become. "I'm sorry it took this long," she finally said. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you. But I can make sure he pays. I can make sure everyone knows what he did." The wind rustled through the trees. A bird called somewhere in the distance. Mark's grave offered no answers, no absolution, no sign that this revenge would somehow make things right. But Victoria had come too far to stop now. 1 week before the gala, she practiced her exit. She walked through every step, timing it precisely. The moment she'd leave the ballroom, the route she'd take to avoid cameras, the car she'd have waiting 3 blocks away, the flight to Sao Paulo leaving at midnight, the new identity waiting for her there. Not Claire Bennett, not Victoria Hale, but someone else entirely. She'd memorized the plan until it lived in her muscle memory, until she could execute it in her sleep. The night before the gala, Ethan had held her close in bed, talking about the future, about expanding the company internationally, about maybe having another child, about growing old together. Victoria had listened and smiled and said all the right things, and she'd felt absolutely nothing. That's when she knew she'd succeeded. She'd transformed herself so completely that Claire Bennett was gone. There was only Victoria now. Only the mission. Only revenge. The morning of the gala, she'd put on the yellow diamond necklace Ethan had given her, $3 million of compressed carbon hanging around her neck, and she'd remembered why she'd accepted it in the first place. Because inside that diamond, embedded during the manufacturing process, were encrypted files containing every piece of evidence she'd gathered, government secrets, financial crimes, the whole corrupted system that kept men like Ethan Caldwell safe from consequences. He'd given her the weapon to destroy him, and he didn't even know it. Victoria had looked at herself in the mirror that morning. The face that wasn't hers, the name that wasn't hers, the life that was nothing but carefully constructed lies, and she'd felt a wild surge of triumph. Tonight, it would all be over. Tonight, Ethan Caldwell would lose everything, and Claire Bennett would finally be free. The freedom lasted exactly 48 hours. Victoria. She still thought of herself that way. The name Claire felt like something from a previous life. Sat in a cafe in Sao Paulo's Jardins district, watching rain streak down the windows. Her new passport identified her as Elena Marchetti, an Italian consultant relocating to South America for work. The documents were flawless. The backstory was solid. She had enough money hidden in cryptocurrency wallets to live comfortably for decades without ever working again. She should have felt victorious. Instead, she felt hollowed out, empty in a way that $800 million couldn't fix. Her coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago. She kept staring at her phone, checking news sites obsessively. The story had broken exactly as planned. Ethan's arrest was front-page news. The classified files she'd leaked were being analyzed by every intelligence agency in the Western Hemisphere. Senator Mitchell had resigned. 3 other politicians had already lawyered up. Caldwell Technologies' stock had crashed so hard trading had been suspended. Everything was working. So why did she feel like she'd lost something instead of won? Her phone buzzed. A news alert. FBI seeks Victoria Hale in connection with Caldwell investigation. They'd figured it out faster than she'd expected. There was a photo, one from her wedding, her and Ethan smiling like people who'd actually loved each other. The caption called her a person of interest, which was FBI speak for, "We know she did it, but can't prove it yet." Victoria deleted the alert and ordered another coffee she wouldn't drink. The rain was getting heavier. The cafe was nearly empty. Just her, an old man reading a newspaper, and 2 teenagers giggling over something on their phones. Normal people living normal lives. Victoria envied them. She'd been in Sao Paulo for 36 hours. The plan was to stay for a week, let the initial manhunt cool down, then move to Valparaiso under a different identity. She had apartments rented in 4 cities, all under different names. She could keep moving for years if necessary. But sitting here, watching rain and drinking bad coffee and feeling nothing, Victoria started to wonder what the point was. She'd destroyed Ethan Caldwell. She'd exposed a corrupt system. She'd avenged her brother's death. And Mark was still dead. That was the thing they never told you about revenge. It didn't actually fix anything. It didn't bring people back. It just left you alone with the person you'd become while pursuing it. Victoria paid for her coffee and walked out into the rain. She didn't have an umbrella. Didn't care. The water soaked through her jacket within seconds, plastering her hair to her skull, but it felt good. Real. The first real thing she'd felt since leaving New York. She walked for an hour, letting the rain punish her, until she found herself in front of a small church. She almost laughed. She hadn't been religious since she was a child, but something about the building's quiet solidity drew her in. The interior was dim and cool. A handful of people sat in the pews, praying or thinking or just escaping the rain. Victoria sat in the back row and stared at the altar, trying to remember the last time she'd felt at peace, before Mark died. That was the answer. Everything after that had been chaos and calculation and the slow transformation into someone she barely recognized. "You look troubled." Victoria turned. An elderly woman had sat down beside her, wrinkled hands folded in her lap. She had kind eyes, the sort of eyes that had seen too much but hadn't turned bitter about it. "I'm fine," Victoria said automatically. Fine is what we say when we're anything but. The woman smiled. "I'm Rosa. I come here when the world gets too loud." "You?" "Elena," Victoria lied, "and I don't know why I'm here. I'm not religious." "Neither am I, really, but quiet is quiet, regardless of whose building you find it in." Rosa studied her face. "You're running from something." It wasn't a question. Victoria should have deflected, made an excuse, left. Instead, she heard herself say, "I did something terrible to someone who deserved it, and now I don't know if that makes me justice or just another monster." Rosa was quiet for a long moment. "In my experience, monsters don't ask themselves that question. They just act and assume they're right. What if I destroyed an innocent person in the process of destroying a guilty one?" "Did you mean to?" Victoria thought about Lily, 7 years old, sleeping peacefully while her father's entire world collapsed. She'd wake up tomorrow to find him in jail, her stepmother vanished, her life torn apart. And Victoria had known that would happen, had accepted it as necessary collateral damage. "Yes," Victoria whispered. "I knew exactly what I was doing." Rosa nodded slowly. "Then you have to live with that. We all do, eventually. The question isn't whether you can undo it. You can't. The question is what you do next. Do you keep running, or do you stop and face what you've become?" Before Victoria could answer, her phone vibrated. A news alert she couldn't ignore. Breaking. Victoria Hale spotted in Santiago, Chile. FBI requests extradition. Santiago, not Sao Paulo. They were looking in the wrong place. But the alert meant something else. Someone had reported seeing her, which meant someone else knew what she looked like, where she'd gone, what identity she was traveling under. Someone was hunting her. Victoria stood abruptly. "I have to go." Rosa caught her hand. "Whatever you're running from, child, it will catch you eventually. You can't outrun yourself. Watch me." Victoria pulled free and walked out of the church into the rain. Her mind was already racing through possibilities. The Victoria Hale identity was burned. The FBI would have flagged it internationally. But Elena Marchetti should still be clean, unless someone had connected the dots, unless someone had been tracking her movements since she left New York. She flagged a taxi and gave the driver an address 3 blocks from her apartment. Standard operational security. Never let anyone know exactly where you're staying. The driver didn't speak English and her Portuguese was limited, so they drove in silence through rain-slicked streets. Victoria's apartment was in a nondescript building in Pinheiros, 3rd floor, corner unit, paid for in cash through a local lawyer who asked no questions. She'd only been there once since arriving, just long enough to drop off a bag and check the escape routes. She climbed the stairs slowly, watching for anything unusual. The hallway was empty. Her door was locked, no signs of tampering. She keyed in the code and slipped inside. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. Suitcase on the bed, laptop charging on the desk, window overlooking a courtyard where someone's laundry hung limp in the rain. Victoria locked the door and checked the laptop. Her encrypted monitoring software showed no alerts. The cryptocurrency wallets were untouched. The backup identities were still secure in a safety deposit box at a bank she'd never visit personally. She was safe. For now. But that news alert bothered her. Someone had spotted Victoria Hale in Santiago, which meant either it was a false lead, mistaken identity, someone who looked like her, or someone was deliberately feeding the FBI bad information to throw them off her trail. The question was why? Who would help her? Who even knew where she was? Victoria opened an encrypted browser and checked the dark web forums she'd been monitoring. Nothing unusual. Then she checked her dead drop email account, the one she'd set up for emergency contact with her journalist source at the Washington Post. One new message, sent 3 hours ago. They know about the diamond. Get rid of it, now. Victoria's blood went cold. The diamond. The yellow diamond necklace that was currently sitting in a velvet case inside her suitcase. The one containing encrypted files worth more than the 800 million she'd stolen. How did anyone know about that? She'd been so careful. The encryption was military grade. The data was compressed and hidden in the diamond's molecular structure using techniques that weren't even publicly known. Only 3 people in the world had the technology to extract those files. 2 were dead, and the third was a former NSA contractor who'd sold Victoria the equipment and then disappeared to Thailand. Unless someone else had figured it out. Unless someone had been monitoring her more closely than she'd realized. Victoria grabbed the diamond case and opened it. The necklace glittered in the dim light, innocent and beautiful. $3 million of compressed carbon. And inside, enough government secrets to start wars. She should destroy it. Smash it to powder, flush it down the toilet, scatter the pieces across Sao Paulo. That was the smart move. But destroying it meant destroying the only leverage she had left. The files she'd leaked were damaging, yes, but they were also out there now. Public. Anyone could access them. The diamond contained the really dangerous stuff. The things she'd held back specifically because they were too explosive to release all at once. Black Ops programs. Assassination orders with presidential signatures. Financial connections between elected officials and foreign intelligence agencies. The kind of information that didn't just ruin careers, it toppled governments. Victoria had kept it as insurance, a guarantee that if anyone came after her, she could threaten to release everything and watch the world burn. Now someone knew about it, which meant that insurance policy had just become a target on her back. Her phone buzzed again, this time not a news alert, a text from an unknown number. Roof, 5 minutes. Come alone or I start shooting. Victoria's hand went to the concealed holster at her hip. The ceramic knife was still there, airport safe, undetectable by metal detectors, sharp enough to open someone's throat in one motion. She'd carried it since leaving New York, half expecting she'd eventually need it. Looked like eventually had arrived. She could run, grab the diamond, leave everything else, disappear out the back exit she'd scouted her first day here. But whoever sent that text clearly knew where she was. Running would just delay the inevitable. Instead, Victoria checked the knife, pocketed the diamond, and climbed the stairs to the roof. The rain had softened to a drizzle. The rooftop was cluttered with satellite dishes and laundry lines and forgotten furniture. Victoria stepped out carefully, scanning for threats. A figure stood near the edge, silhouetted against the Sao Paulo skyline. Male, average height, wearing a long coat that could hide any number of weapons. He didn't turn when Victoria approached. "Stop there," he said. American accent, East Coast, maybe Boston. "Hands where I can see them." Victoria complied. "Who are you?" "Someone who's been tracking you since you left New York." He turned slowly. Mid-40s, weathered face, eyes that had seen violence and become comfortable with it. "My employers are very interested in what you took from Ethan Caldwell. Your employers can get in line. Half the intelligence agencies in the world want those files. I'm not talking about the files you leaked." He took a step closer. "I'm talking about what's in that diamond you're carrying." Victoria's hand tightened on the knife in her pocket. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please, we've been monitoring Caldwell's communications for 2 years. We know he had classified data embedded in that necklace. We know you took it when you disappeared. And we know you're smart enough to understand exactly how valuable it is." "Who's we, huh?" The man smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "That's above your pay grade. What matters is we want the diamond. Hand it over peacefully, and you can keep running. We don't care about Victoria Hale or Elena Marchetti or whatever name you're using next week. We just want the data. And if I refuse, then I kill you and take it anyway. Your choice." Victoria calculated distances. 6 feet between them, rain making the roof slippery. She could reach him with the knife, but she'd have to be fast. And if he had a gun, which he almost certainly did, she'd need to close the distance before he could draw it. "I need proof you are who you say you are," Victoria said, stalling. For all I know, you're just some freelancer who got lucky tracking me down. You need proof? The man reached into his coat. Victoria tensed, ready to move, but he just pulled out a phone and held up a photo. It showed Victoria as Claire Bennett standing outside Mark's grave 2 weeks ago. The photo she thought no one had witnessed. We've been watching you for a long time, Ms. Bennett. Longer than you've been watching Caldwell. We knew what you were planning. We just needed to wait until you executed it. The pieces clicked together in Victoria's mind. You wanted me to destroy Caldwell. You needed someone disposable to do your dirty work. Caldwell had something that belonged to us. We needed it recovered without direct involvement. You were convenient. And now I'm inconvenient. Now you're a liability. The man's hand moved toward his jacket. Last chance. The diamond. Victoria pulled the knife and lunged. She was fast. Faster than he expected. The blade caught him across the forearm before he could draw his weapon, opening a red line through the fabric of his coat. He swore and stumbled back, his gun clattering to the ground. Victoria kicked it away and pressed the knife to his throat. Who sent you? She demanded. CIA? NSA? Some black ops group that doesn't exist on paper? You're making a mistake. Victoria pressed harder. A bead of blood appeared where the blade touched skin. Answer the question. You think killing me changes anything? The man's voice was steady despite the knife at his throat. There are 6 more operatives in this city. You disappear, they find you. You kill me, they hunt you harder. You can't win this. Watch me. Victoria's hand moved, not to kill, but to knock him unconscious with the knife's pommel. He dropped like a stone. She checked his pockets quickly, finding a passport that was obviously fake, a phone that required biometric unlock, and a folded piece of paper. The paper was a photograph. It showed a man Victoria didn't recognize standing next to Ethan Caldwell at some political function. On the back, a name. Graves, primary operator. Victoria pocketed this phone and the photo. The gun she disassembled in scattered pieces across the roof. Then she zip-tied the unconscious man's hands using a laundry line and dragged him behind a satellite dish where he wouldn't be immediately visible. She had maybe 20 minutes before he woke up, maybe an hour before his team realized something was wrong. Not enough time. Not nearly enough. Victoria ran back to her apartment, grabbed the essentials, laptop, cash, backup passports, and left everything else. The suitcase, the clothes, the carefully constructed life of Elena Marchetti. All abandoned. She took a different route down, through the building's service entrance, and emerged 3 blocks away. The rain had picked up again. Good. Rain meant fewer cameras, fewer witnesses, fewer ways to track her. Victoria flagged another taxi and gave the driver directions to the bus station. Buses were slower than planes, but harder to trace. She could be in Bolivia by tomorrow, Argentina by the weekend. She just needed to stay ahead of whoever Graves was long enough to figure out her next move. As the taxi pulled into traffic, Victoria checked the phone she'd taken. It had locked itself, but not before she'd glimpsed one notification. Target acquired. Retrieve package by any means necessary. Authorization granted for wet work. Wet work. Intelligence community speak for assassination. They weren't just after the diamond. They were after her. Victoria stared out at Sao Paulo's sprawling chaos, favelas climbing hillsides, glass towers punching through smog. Millions of people living their lives unaware that someone was about to die in their city. Maybe her. Maybe Graves. Maybe both. The bus station was crowded and chaotic. Perfect. Victoria bought a ticket to Porto Alegre using cash and a name she'd never used before. The bus didn't leave for 2 hours, so she found a corner and sat with her back to the wall, watching everyone who entered. Her mind kept returning to that photo of her at Mark's grave. Someone had been watching. Someone had known exactly what she was planning and had let her do it because it served their purposes. She'd thought she was playing chess. Turned out she'd been a pawn the whole time. The realization should have been crushing. Instead, Victoria felt something almost like relief, because if powerful people wanted the diamond badly enough to send killers after her, that meant it was even more valuable than she'd thought. Which meant she had leverage. Real leverage. The kind that could keep her alive long enough to finish what she'd started. She pulled out the diamond and held it up to the fluorescent light. It caught the glow, refracting it into rainbow fragments across her palm. So much weight in such a small package. So much power compressed into crystallized carbon. Victoria had taken it from Ethan, intending to use it as insurance. Now it was her only weapon. She needed somewhere safe. Somewhere she could access the encrypted data, figure out exactly what was so important that people were willing to kill for it. Somewhere with good internet and bad extradition laws, and enough chaos that one more fugitive wouldn't stand out. Valparaiso. The plan had always been to end up there eventually. A port city in Chile, built on 45 hills overlooking the Pacific. Narrow streets, colorful houses, a population that included everyone from artists to criminals to people who'd simply decided the rules didn't apply to them anymore. Victoria could disappear there, at least for a while. The bus to Porto Alegre arrived. Victoria boarded, chose a seat in the back, and settled in for the 8-hour ride. She didn't sleep. Couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mark's face. Then Lily's. Then Ethan's, crumbling as federal agents read him his rights. What had Rosa said? You can't outrun yourself. Maybe not. But Victoria was damn well going to try. The bus rolled through the night, carrying her away from Sao Paulo and toward an uncertain future. Outside the windows, Brazil sprawled in darkness, vast and indifferent. Somewhere behind her, men with guns were hunting. Somewhere ahead, more danger waited. And in her pocket, a diamond held secrets that could change everything. Victoria didn't know if she'd live long enough to use them. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was done running scared. She was done being a pawn in someone else's game. If they wanted the diamond, they'd have to kill her for it. And Victoria had already decided she wasn't dying until Ethan Caldwell's entire world burned to ash. The bus drove on through the darkness, carrying her toward whatever came next. Behind her, Sao Paulo's lights faded into the distance. Ahead, the future waited, uncertain, dangerous, and entirely hers. For the first time since leaving New York, Victoria smiled. Let them come. She'd be ready. Valparaiso smelled like salt and rust and history nobody wanted to remember. Victoria arrived on a Tuesday afternoon after 3 days of paranoid travel, buses, trains, a fishing boat that asked no questions as long as the cash was good. She'd changed clothes 4 times, hair twice, and identities so many times she had to check her current passport to remember who she was supposed to be. Sofia Reyes, Spanish national, freelance photographer. The story was thin but functional. The city sprawled across its hills like paint someone had spilled and never bothered cleaning up. Houses in electric blue, violent pink, sun-faded yellow, stacked on top of each other in defiance of physics and common sense. Narrow streets twisted through neighborhoods where laundry hung between buildings like prayer flags and graffiti covered every surface that didn't move. Victoria found a hostel in Cerro Alegre that accepted cash and didn't ask for identification beyond a cursory glance. Her room was the size of a closet, shared bathroom down the hall, window overlooking an alley where cats fought over garbage. It was perfect. She locked the door and checked the diamond first. Still there? Still intact. Still worth more than her life if the wrong people found her. The encrypted data extraction would require equipment she didn't have. The NSA contractor who'd helped her embed the files had used a specialized laser reader, military hardware that wasn't exactly available at the local electronics shop. Victoria had planned for this. She'd researched alternative methods, found a physicist in Santiago who'd published papers on non-destructive diamond analysis, someone who might have access to the right tools. Getting to Santiago meant risking the very city where the FBI thought she'd been spotted, but Victoria was done being careful. Careful had gotten her hunted across 2 continents. She pulled out the laptop and connected to the hostel's Wi-Fi through 3 layers of VPN encryption. The news from New York was worse than she'd expected. Ethan's arraignment had been moved up. His lawyers were already negotiating a plea deal. Senator Mitchell had been found dead in his garage. Apparent suicide, the news said, though Victoria didn't believe in coincidences. Someone was cleaning house, removing anyone who might testify about the corruption network, which meant the people hunting her weren't just after the diamond. They were after anyone who knew too much. Victoria opened the encrypted browser and checked her dead drop email. 7 new messages, all from her Washington Post contact. Where are you? FBI came to the office asking questions. The files you sent are bigger than we thought. We're getting pressure to kill the story. Call me. We need to talk about next steps. Victoria, If you're alive, please respond. Things are getting dangerous. The last message had been sent 6 hours ago. They killed Jenkins. Car bomb outside his apartment. Everyone's saying it was you. Please tell me it wasn't you." Victoria's hands shook as she read it again. Jenkins. David Jenkins, the investigative reporter who'd been helping her verify the leaked documents. Dead. Blown up in his own driveway. They were sending a message. Keep digging, and this is what happens. Victoria should have felt guilty, should have felt responsible. Instead, she felt cold fury building in her chest, the kind that made thinking clearly difficult and acting rashly very appealing. She typed a response. "I didn't kill Jenkins, but I know who did. And I'm going to make them pay for it. Stay safe. Don't publish anything else until I say so." She hit send before she could overthink it. Then she erased the browser history, shut down the laptop, and lay on the narrow bed staring at water stains on the ceiling. This was supposed to be over. She'd destroyed Ethan, exposed the corruption, gotten her revenge. But instead of closure, she'd just opened a door to something bigger. Something that involved assassinations and cover-ups and people powerful enough to murder journalists in broad daylight. Mark had tried to expose a defective product. Victoria had exposed an entire shadow government. She'd escalated without meaning to. And now they were coming for everyone who knew about it. Her phone buzzed. The burner she'd bought in Porto Alegre, the one only 3 people had the number to. She checked the screen. Unknown number. Text message. Cerro Alegre. Yellow house with blue trim. You have 12 hours to deliver the diamond or the girl dies. Attached was a photo. Victoria's blood turned to ice. Lily, Ethan's daughter, 7 years old, sitting in what looked like a hotel room, holding today's newspaper to prove the photo was recent. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying. Behind her, just barely visible in the reflection of a mirror, stood a man in a dark jacket. Victoria's vision tunneled. The room spun. She read the message 3 more times, trying to find something that made it not real. They had Lily. They'd taken a child, an innocent 7-year-old child, and they were using her as leverage. Victoria wanted to vomit, wanted to scream, wanted to find whoever sent this message and make them suffer in ways she'd never imagined herself capable of. Instead, she forced herself to breathe, to think, to calculate. 12 hours. They knew where she was. The yellow house with blue trim was visible from her window. They'd been watching, waiting, and now they'd played their final card. "Give us the diamond, or we kill the kid." Victoria looked at the diamond sitting on the nightstand. $3 million of compressed carbon containing secrets worth killing for, worth dying for, worth sacrificing everything to protect, but not worth more than a 7-year-old girl. She'd spent 4 years planning revenge against Ethan Caldwell. She'd destroyed his company, his reputation, his freedom. She'd taken everything from him, but she'd never meant to hurt Lily. The girl was supposed to be safe with her nanny, protected by Ethan's security team, insulated from the consequences of adult decisions. Victoria had told herself that Lily would recover, that children were resilient, that the temporary trauma would fade once Lily was old enough to understand her father's crimes. She'd lied to herself. And now Lily was paying the price. Victoria grabbed her phone and typed a response. "How do I know she's alive? How do I know you'll let her go if I give you what you want?" The reply came 30 seconds later. "You don't, but you know what happens if you refuse. Make your choice." Victoria threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and shattered, plastic and glass scattering across the floor. She sat on the bed with her head in her hands, trying to breathe through the panic clawing at her throat. She'd become exactly what she hated, a person who hurt innocent people to achieve her goals. A person who told herself the ends justified the means right up until they didn't. Rosa's voice echoed in her memory. "Do you keep running, or do you stop and face what you've become?" Victoria stood up. She picked up the diamond, weighed it in her palm one last time, then put it in her pocket. She grabbed the ceramic knife, checked that the blade was still sharp, and walked out of the hostel into Valparaiso's chaotic streets. She had 12 hours to save a child and probably get herself killed in the process. Might as well get started. The yellow house with blue trim was 3 blocks away, perched on a steep hill overlooking the harbor. Victoria approached from above, using the maze of stairways and narrow passages that connected Valparaiso's different levels. The city's layout was deliberately confusing, a defense mechanism from centuries of pirates and invaders, and she used it now to scout the building without being seen. Two men outside, both trying to look casual but standing in positions that covered the front and side entrances. Professional surveillance, which meant there were probably more inside. Victoria counted windows. 3 floors, 4 windows per floor. Lights on in the second floor front room and the third floor corner, curtains drawn everywhere else. She needed intel. Needed to know how many people were inside, where Lily was being held, what kind of weapons they had. She needed a lot of things she didn't have time to get. Instead, she circled to the back of the building where someone's laundry hung on a line strung between windows. Victoria climbed the neighbor's wall, balanced on the narrow ledge, and dropped onto the back balcony of the yellow house. The door was locked. She used the knife to jimmy it open, a trick she'd learned from a very different life, and slipped inside. The apartment was old, furnished with mismatched furniture that had been expensive once and was now just worn. Victoria moved through it silently, listening. Voices upstairs. At least 3 different people. One of them was speaking English with an American accent. "I don't care what your orders were. The girl stays unharmed until we have the diamond. And if the target doesn't show? Then we use the girl to draw her out. But I'm not killing a kid unless there's no other option. We're not animals." Victoria recognized the voice. The man from the Sao Paulo rooftop. The one she'd knocked unconscious and left tied up. He'd found her, and he'd brought Lily into this as insurance. She climbed the stairs 1 step at a time, testing each board before putting weight on it. The 3rd step creaked. She froze, waiting for someone to investigate. Nothing. The voices continued. "How long do we wait?" "She has 12 hours. She'll come. She's emotionally compromised. That's her weakness. She'll trade the diamond for the kid. And then? Then we kill them both and dump the bodies in the harbor." Victoria's jaw clenched. She'd expected that answer, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that text messages didn't. She reached the 2nd floor landing. 2 doors, one slightly ajar, light spilling out. The voices were coming from there. Victoria peered through the crack. 3 men. The one from Sao Paulo, Graves, according to the photo she'd found, and 2 others. They were armed. Handguns in shoulder holsters, one of them holding a rifle loosely like he was comfortable with it. No sign of Lily. Victoria moved to the 2nd door, locked from the outside, which was promising. She tried the handle carefully. The lock was cheap, probably original to the building. The knife made quick work of it. Inside, Lily sat on a bed, knees pulled to her chest, crying quietly. When Victoria entered, the girl looked up with red, terrified eyes. "Who are you?" Lily whispered. Victoria's heart broke into pieces she'd never be able to put back together. "I'm Victoria, your father's wife. I'm going to get you out of here." Lily's face crumpled. "They said you ran away. They said you stole money and disappeared, and now Dad's in jail because of you." "All of that's true." Victoria knelt in front of the bed. "Your father did bad things, Lily. I exposed them. And I'm sorry you got caught in the middle of this. But right now, I need you to be brave. Can you do that?" "I want my dad." "I know, and you'll see him again. But first we have to get out of this house." Victoria pulled out her phone, the new burner she'd bought after smashing the first one. "I'm going to call someone. The police or the FBI or—" "No police." Victoria turned. Graves stood in the doorway, gun pointed at her chest. He looked tired, annoyed, like this whole situation was an inconvenience he'd rather avoid. "Step away from the girl," he said. Victoria stood slowly, keeping her hands visible. The knife was in her back pocket. She could reach it in maybe 2 seconds. But Graves had his finger on the trigger and he was 12 feet away. She'd be dead before she closed half that distance. "You got my message," Graves said. "So where's the diamond?" "Let her go first." "That's not how this works." "Then shoot me. But you'll never find the diamond. I didn't bring it with me." Graves smiled without humor. "You're lying. You wouldn't come here empty-handed. You care too much. That's your problem. You think caring makes you strong. Really, it just makes you predictable." He was right. Victoria had the diamond in her pocket, but admitting that meant losing her only leverage. "You killed Jenkins," she said, stalling. "The journalist." "I didn't personally, but my organization did, yes. He was getting too close to things that needed to stay buried." "Things like what? Government assassinations? Black ops programs? The kind of stuff that's embedded in this diamond? Graves's expression didn't change. You have no idea what you're holding. That data doesn't just expose programs. It exposes people. Specific people who've spent decades building power structures they won't give up peacefully. You release those files, you don't just burn some politicians, you start a war. Maybe the world needs that war. You're naive. Wars have casualties. Millions of them. Is that worth your revenge? Victoria glanced at Lily, who was watching this exchange with wide, uncomprehending eyes. You brought a child into this. You're threatening to kill her. Don't lecture me about casualties. The girl was leverage, an unpleasant necessity. Graves stepped into the room. But I'm giving you a choice. Hand over the diamond, and both of you walk out of here. My team gets what it needs, you disappear wherever you want, and the girl goes home. Everyone wins. Except the people whose crimes stay hidden. Those people are going to stay hidden regardless. You're one woman with one diamond. We're a network that's existed for 50 years. You can't fight us. You can only choose whether you die trying. Victoria's hand moved toward her pocket. Not for the diamond, for the knife. But Graves saw the motion and raised his gun. Don't. Victoria? Lily's voice was small, terrified. I'm scared. Everything stopped. The room, the world, the calculations running through Victoria's head about trajectories and odds and acceptable losses. All of it stopped because a 7-year-old girl was scared and it was Victoria's fault. She thought about Mark, about the revenge that had consumed 4 years of her life, about whether any of it had been worth the person she'd become. The answer was no. It had never been worth it. Okay, Victoria said quietly. I'll give you the diamond, but the girl leaves first. Put her in a taxi to the police station. Once I see her safe, you get what you want. Graves considered this. How do I know you won't run the second she's clear? Because I'm tired of running. And because, unlike you, I'm not willing to get a kid killed over classified files and political secrets. Victoria pulled out the diamond slowly, holding it up so Graves could see it. This is what you want, right? The data that exposes everyone? Graves stared at the diamond like it was holy. That's it. Yeah, it's amazing how much evil you can compress into $3 million of carbon. Victoria tossed it to him. He caught it reflexively, his gun lowering for just a second. That second was all Victoria needed. She pulled the knife and threw it in one motion. The blade wasn't balanced for throwing, it was designed for close combat, but Victoria had practiced with worse. The knife tumbled through the air and embedded itself in Graves's shoulder. He screamed and dropped the diamond. His gun went off, wild shot that punched through the ceiling. Victoria was already moving, crossing the 12 feet faster than seemed possible, driving her shoulder into his chest and slamming him against the wall. The gun clattered to the floor. Victoria kicked it away and grabbed Graves by the throat. Where are the other guards? Downstairs, Graves choked out. They heard the shot. They're coming. Victoria could already hear boots pounding up the stairs. She had maybe 10 seconds before this room became a kill box. She grabbed the diamond from where it had rolled under the bed, then took Lily's hand. We're leaving. Now. The window, Lily said suddenly. There's a fire escape. Victoria looked. Sure enough, a rusty metal platform visible through the grime-covered glass. She shoved the window open and helped Lily climb through, then followed just as the door burst open and 2 men with guns entered. Bullets punched through the window frame. Glass shattered. Victoria felt something hot graze her arm, but ignored it. She grabbed Lily and jumped onto the fire escape, metal groaning under their combined weight. They climbed down as fast as the rusted ladder would allow. Above them, more gunshots. One of the men was leaning out the window, aiming. Victoria pulled Lily close and dropped the last 8 feet to the alley below, landing hard enough that her ankle screamed in protest. Run, she told Lily. Don't stop. Don't look back. They ran through Valparaiso's maze of streets and staircases. Victoria's injured ankle slowing her down, but adrenaline keeping her moving. Behind them, shouting in English and Spanish. The hunters coordinating their search. Victoria pulled Lily into a narrow passage between 2 houses, barely wide enough for their shoulders. They squeezed through, emerging onto a different street entirely. An old woman was selling empanadas from a cart. Victoria grabbed Lily's hand and walked past like they were tourists, trying to look casual while blood dripped from her arm. Are you okay? Lily whispered. I'm fine. Keep walking. They made it 3 more blocks before Victoria's ankle gave out completely. She collapsed against a wall, gasping, trying to decide what to do next. Lily looked at her with those same wide eyes. You're bleeding. It's just a scratch. Victoria ripped fabric from her shirt and tied it around the wound. Lily, I need you to listen carefully. There's a police station 6 blocks that way. She pointed. I need you to go there. Tell them who you are. Tell them men with guns kidnapped you. Don't mention me. Can you do that? What about you? I'll be fine. I just need to lose the people chasing us. Lily shook her head. No, you saved me. I'm not leaving you. Victoria wanted to argue but didn't have the strength. Instead, she pulled out the diamond one last time and stared at it. All this trouble, all this death, for compressed data that powerful people would kill to protect. She'd thought exposing the truth would be enough. That sunlight was the best disinfectant, that transparency would fix corruption. But Graves was right. Releasing this data wouldn't fix anything. It would just start a different kind of war. Victoria made a decision. She handed the diamond to Lily. Keep this safe. Don't show it to anyone until you're with the FBI. Then tell them it came from me. Tell them to analyze it carefully. Tell them everything inside needs to see daylight. I don't understand. You don't have to. Just promise me you'll give it to someone who can do something with it. Lily nodded solemnly. I promise. Victoria hugged her, quick, fierce, the kind of hug that tried to communicate everything words couldn't. I'm sorry about your dad. I'm sorry about all of this. You deserved better. Are you going to run away again? Yeah, I am. Because that's what people like me do. Victoria stood up, testing her ankle. It held, barely. But first I'm going to make sure those men can't follow you. So when I say run, you run to the police station and you don't stop. Understand? Lily nodded. Victoria took a deep breath, then stepped out into the street and started limping in the opposite direction. She made it half a block before she heard the shout. There, the target! Victoria ran, or tried to. Her ankle buckled with every step, each impact sending lightning through her leg. Behind her, footsteps. Getting closer. She ducked into an alley, then another, trying to use the city's chaotic layout to lose them. But there were too many hunters and only one of her. They were herding her toward the harbor, cutting off escape routes, coordinating like the professionals they were. Victoria burst out onto the waterfront. Cargo ships lined the docks. Fishermen repaired nets. Seagulls screamed overhead. And directly in front of her, 3 men with guns blocked the only exit. She was trapped. Graves appeared from behind a shipping container, blood soaking his shoulder where the knife had hit. End of the line! Victoria backed up until she felt the dock's edge beneath her heels. Water lapped at the pilings 10 feet below. She could jump. Probably survive. Maybe escape. Or she could stand and fight and die on her feet. Where's the diamond? Graves demanded. Gone. I gave it to the girl. She's probably at the police station by now, handing it over to someone who'll actually do something with it. Graves's face went white. You're lying. I'm really not. Your whole operation is about to be exposed. Everyone involved. Every crime. Every assassination. All of it. Victoria smiled despite the guns pointed at her. So I guess you can kill me. But it won't change what's coming. For a long moment, nobody moved. Graves stared at her like he was trying to decide if she was bluffing. The other men looked at him, waiting for orders. Then Graves lowered his gun. Let her go. Sir? I said let her go. She doesn't have the diamond. Killing her accomplishes nothing except creating more problems. Graves turned and walked away. We have bigger issues to deal with now. The other men hesitated, then followed. Victoria watched them disappear into the maze of shipping containers, half expecting them to come back shooting. They didn't. She stood alone on the dock, waves crashing against the pilings, trying to process what had just happened. She'd given away her only leverage, her only protection. The thing that had made her valuable enough to keep alive. And somehow, impossibly, she was still breathing. Victoria limped away from the harbor, heading nowhere in particular. Her arm throbbed. Her ankle was swelling. She probably had a concussion from the fall off the fire escape, but she was alive, and Lily was safe, and the diamond, the cursed thing that had caused so much death, was finally out of her hands. She found a bench overlooking the Pacific and sat down to watch the sunset. The sky burned orange and purple, painting the water in colors that didn't have names. Somewhere out there, Lily was telling her story to police. Somewhere, the data Victoria had fought to protect was being analyzed by people who might actually use it for good. And somewhere, Ethan Caldwell was sitting in a cell paying for his crimes. Victoria had gotten her revenge. She'd destroyed the man who'd killed her brother. She'd exposed corruption that went all the way to the top. But she'd also gotten people killed. She'd traumatized a child. She'd become the kind of person who made impossible choices and lived with the consequences. The sun sank below the horizon. The sky faded from purple to black. Victoria stood up and walked into Valparaiso's labyrinth of streets, letting the city swallow her whole. She had no plan, no destination, no identity that wasn't borrowed or stolen. But for the first time in 4 years, she was free, and that, Victoria decided, would have to be enough. 3 months passed before Victoria saw her face on television again. She was in a cafe in Bariloche, Argentina, drinking coffee that tasted like burned dirt and reading a book she wasn't actually absorbing. The television above the bar was playing CNN with Spanish subtitles. She'd gotten good at ignoring it. The news was always the same anyway, just different faces saying different lies. Then she heard the name, Ethan Caldwell. Her head snapped up. The screen showed footage of a courtroom, packed wall to wall with reporters and paras and people who'd come to watch a billionaire's empire crumble in real time. Ethan sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. He looked older, thinner, like someone had hollowed him out and left only the shell. Victoria turned up the volume on her phone, which was streaming the English broadcast. Unprecedented development in the Caldwell Technologies corruption trial. Prosecutors announced this morning that new evidence has emerged, evidence they claim will prove beyond doubt that Ethan Caldwell deliberately covered up safety defects in military equipment and was directly involved in the death of whistleblower Mark Bennett 4 years ago. The camera cut to a federal prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who looked like she'd spent her entire career waiting for a case this big. The evidence comes from an encrypted data file recovered by FBI agents 3 months ago, the prosecutor said. Inside that file are communications, financial records, and technical documents that paint a clear picture of a conspiracy to defraud the United States government and silence anyone who threatened to expose it. Victoria's coffee went cold in her hands. The diamond. Lily had delivered it just like she'd promised, and the FBI had actually done something with it. The broadcast cut to commercial. Victoria sat frozen, trying to process what she'd just witnessed. She'd given up the diamond thinking it might make a difference, but she'd never actually believed it would. People like Ethan had too much money, too many connections, too many ways to make problems disappear. But apparently not this time. Her phone buzzed. A new email to one of her burner accounts, the one she checked once a week out of habit more than necessity. The subject line made her stomach drop. You should be here for this. LL Lily. Somehow Ethan's 7-year-old daughter had found a way to contact her. Victoria opened the message. It was short, just 3 lines and a video attachment. They're going to sentence him today. I thought you'd want to see it. He asks about you sometimes. I don't know what to tell him. The video was time-stamped 2 hours ago. Victoria hesitated, then played it. The courtroom again, but now from a different angle. Someone, probably Lily's nanny, had recorded it on a phone. The judge was speaking, reading from prepared remarks in that measured tone judges used when they wanted everyone to understand how serious this was. Mr. Caldwell, you have been found guilty on 17 counts of fraud, conspiracy, bribery of federal officials, and criminally negligent homicide in the death of Mark Bennett. The evidence against you was overwhelming. You used your wealth and influence to corrupt government officials, silence whistleblowers, and endanger the lives of military personnel who relied on your technology. Ethan stood motionless, staring straight ahead. His lawyer had stopped whispering. There was nothing left to say. However, the judge continued, I must note that the path to justice in this case was unusual. The primary evidence came from your former wife, a woman who, by all accounts, manipulated you, infiltrated your company under false pretenses, and stole classified information. Victoria Hale, or Claire Bennett, or whatever her real name is, committed numerous federal crimes in her pursuit of revenge against you. Victoria's heart hammered. She'd known this was coming eventually, known she couldn't expose Ethan without exposing herself. But hearing it spoken aloud in federal court made it real in a way it hadn't been before. The FBI has an active warrant for her arrest, the judge said. If she's watching this, and I suspect she might be, I want her to know that vigilante justice is still justice denied. What she did, however justified she believed it to be, violated the fundamental principles of our legal system. The judge paused, shuffling papers. That said, without her actions, Mr. Caldwell would likely never have faced accountability for his crimes. So while I cannot condone her methods, I can acknowledge that she accomplished what our institutions failed to do. She brought a corrupt man to justice. Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. Not quite absolution, but recognition maybe. An acknowledgement that her choices, however destructive, had mattered. Ethan Caldwell, the judge continued, I hereby sentence you to 25 years in federal prison to be served consecutively for each count. You will be eligible for parole after serving 15 years, at which point the parole board will determine whether you have sufficiently atoned for the harm you've caused. The courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Ethan's lawyer was already filing objections. But Ethan himself just stood there, finally turning to look directly at the camera. His eyes were empty, defeated. Not the confident CEO who'd once commanded boardrooms and political backrooms. Just a man who'd lost everything and couldn't quite figure out how it had happened. The video ended. Victoria sat in the cafe watching the blank screen, trying to decide how she felt. She'd wanted this, spent 4 years planning it, sacrificed everything to make it happen. But now that it was real, now that Ethan was actually going to prison for what he'd done to Mark, all Victoria felt was tired. She paid for her coffee and walked out into Bariloche's afternoon sunshine. The Andes rose in the distance, snow-capped and indifferent. Tourist shops sold chocolate and wool sweaters. Couples walked hand in hand, planning their evenings, their futures, their lives. Victoria had none of that. She had money, enough to live comfortably for decades. She had freedom, technically, but she also had a federal warrant and the kind of skills that made normal life impossible. She was 30 years old. She looked 27, thanks to careful maintenance and good genetics. She could be anyone, go anywhere, start over completely. Except she couldn't. Because Victoria Hale didn't exist and Claire Bennett was dead and everyone in between was just a mask she'd learned to wear. Her phone buzzed again. Another email, different account. This one from her Washington Post contact. The full story drops tomorrow. Front page, above the fold. The woman who brought down a billionaire. An investigation into Victoria Hale. I tried to be fair. I tried to show both sides. What Caldwell did, what you did, the cost of revenge. But I need to know. Was it worth it? Everything you gave up, everything you became, did it balance the scales? Victoria didn't answer. She didn't know how to. Instead, she walked to the bus station and bought a ticket to Santiago. The diamond story had started there with a false sighting. Might as well finish it there too. The trial had been big news, but the sentencing was a media frenzy. By the time Victoria reached Santiago 36 hours later, every major outlet was running retrospectives on the Caldwell case. Some painted Victoria as a hero. Others called her a criminal. Most landed somewhere in between. A complicated woman who'd done terrible things for understandable reasons. Victoria watched it all from a hotel room, eating takeout and trying to decide what came next. The answer arrived in the form of a knock on her door at 11 p.m. She wasn't expecting anyone, hadn't told anyone where she was. Victoria grabbed the knife, a new one, ceramic and sharp, and approached the door carefully. It's just me, a voice said from the hallway. Female, American accent, vaguely familiar. And I'm unarmed. I just want to talk. Victoria looked through the peephole. Agent Sarah Reeves stood in the hallway, hands visible, no gun drawn. She was alone as far as Victoria could tell. This was either a trap or something more interesting. Victoria opened the door. You're a long way from New York. So are you. Reeves didn't move to enter, just stood in the hallway looking tired. Can I come in, or do you need to check me for wires first? Both. Reeves submitted to a quick pat-down without complaint. No weapon, no wire, just a phone she willingly powered off and left in the hallway. Victoria let her in. Nice knife, Reeves said, eyeing the ceramic blade Victoria hadn't bothered to hide. Airport safe. How'd you find me? I didn't. You found me. Reeves pulled out a piece of paper from her jacket. It was the email Victoria had sent the Washington Post, printed out. You're still using the same encryption patterns. We've been monitoring for them. When you reached out to your journalist friend, it pinged our system. Victoria swore under her breath. Sloppy. She'd gotten careless. "Don't worry," Reeves said quickly. "I'm not here to arrest you. Technically, I'm on vacation. Technically, this conversation isn't happening." "Then what is it?" Reeves sat down uninvited, looking at Victoria with something that might have been respect or might have been exhaustion. Hard to tell. "It's a conversation about what happens next. You exposed one of the biggest corruption scandals in modern history. You got justice for your brother. You destroyed a man who deserved it. And now you're hiding in South American hotel rooms eating lo mein and wondering if any of it mattered." "You don't know what I'm thinking." "I know exactly what you're thinking, because I've spent 20 years in the FBI watching people like you. People who think the system is broken, so they break it further trying to fix it. Some of them end up dead, some end up in prison, and some, the rare ones, figure out how to turn what they've learned into something that actually helps people." Victoria laughed bitterly. "You want me to become an FBI informant? I want you to stop wasting your talents on revenge that's already been served. Ethan Caldwell is in prison. The politicians he bribed are facing their own trials. The corruption network is collapsing. You won. So what are you going to do with the rest of your life?" "Run, probably. Your agency has a warrant for my arrest." "That warrant is complicated." Reeves pulled out another document. "I've been authorized to offer you a deal. Full immunity for all crimes committed in pursuit of exposing Caldwell, in exchange for your testimony about the corruption network and your cooperation in identifying other bad actors." Victoria stared at the paper. "Why would you do that?" "Because you're good at this. Finding patterns, building cases, getting close to people who need to be exposed. The FBI could use someone with your skill set, and you could use a purpose that doesn't involve destroying yourself one fake identity at a time." "I'm not interested in working for the government." "Then work against it. Whistleblower protection, investigative journalism. There are legal ways to do what you did to Caldwell, safer ways." Reeves stood up. "I'm leaving the offer on the table. You have 72 hours to decide. After that, the warrant goes active, and every agent in this hemisphere will be looking for you." "That's not much of a choice." "It's more of a choice than you gave Ethan Caldwell." Reeves walked to the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I think what you did was wrong. You broke the law. You traumatized a child. You got people killed. But I also think Caldwell would still be free if you hadn't done it. So I don't know. Maybe sometimes wrong is the only way to get to right." She left, taking her phone and her impossible offer with her. Victoria sat in the hotel room for a long time, staring at the immunity deal, trying to figure out if she could trust it. The answer was probably not. But then again, she'd spent 4 years not trusting anything, and look where that had gotten her. She picked up her own phone and opened the email from Lily. The video of Ethan's sentencing was still there. Victoria watched it again, this time focusing on the background. Behind Ethan, behind the lawyers and reporters and court officers, sat a little girl with red eyes and a brave face. Lily had delivered the diamond. She'd told the truth. She'd done what Victoria asked, even though it meant destroying her father. And Victoria had abandoned her to deal with the consequences alone. That, more than anything else, decided it. Victoria composed an email to Agent Reeves. "I'll take the deal, but I have conditions. First, Lily Caldwell gets therapy, real therapy, paid for as long as she needs it. Second, I want to testify against everyone involved in the corruption network, not just Caldwell, everyone. And third, when this is over, I want my real name back. I'm done being someone I'm not." She hit send before she could overthink it. Then she packed her bag, the small one, with just the essentials, and walked out of the hotel. She had 72 hours before the deal expired. She was going to spend them doing something she should have done years ago. The cemetery where Mark was buried was in New Jersey, a 40-minute drive from Manhattan. Victoria flew into Newark under the Elena Marchetti passport, knowing it was probably the last time she'd use it. By tomorrow, every border crossing would be flagged. But that was tomorrow's problem. It was raining when she reached the cemetery. Of course it was. The dramatic weather seemed fitting somehow, like the universe was trying to make a point about pathetic fallacy. Mark's grave looked the same as it had 3 months ago. Simple headstone. Cheap flowers left by someone who'd known him, probably their mother. Victoria stood in the rain, soaked through within minutes, trying to find words. "I did it," she finally said. "Caldwell's in prison, 25 years. The people he bribed are being investigated. Your death meant something. It wasn't just suicide like they said. The whole world knows that now. The rain pounded harder. Victoria's voice cracked. But I don't feel better. I thought I would. I thought making him pay would fix something inside me. Instead, I just feel empty. I hurt people, Mark. I hurt a kid. I became exactly the kind of person you would have hated, and I did it all in your name, like that somehow made it okay. She knelt in the mud, not caring about her clothes or her dignity or anything except the weight that had been crushing her for 4 years. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I turned your death into an excuse for revenge. I'm sorry I became someone you wouldn't recognize. The tears came now, hot against cold rain. I just miss you. I miss my brother, and I don't know how to be Claire Bennett anymore without you here. The cemetery offered no answers, just rain and silence and the absolute certainty that Mark was gone and never coming back. But maybe that was the answer. Mark was gone. And Victoria, Claire, whoever she was now, had to figure out how to live with that, not by destroying people, not by burning down empires, just by accepting that some wounds don't heal, they just scar over. She stayed at the grave for an hour, saying nothing, just existing in the space between who she'd been and who she might become. Eventually the rain stopped. The clouds broke. Weak sunlight filtered through the trees. Claire stood up, wiped her eyes, and walked back to her rental car. She had one more stop to make. The apartment building where Lily lived with her nanny was in Tribeca, the kind of place where doormen wore white gloves and asked for identification. Claire approached carefully, knowing this was probably stupid, definitely risky, but necessary in a way she couldn't quite articulate. The doorman was new, someone who wouldn't recognize Victoria Hale from the news coverage. Claire told him she was there to see Lily Caldwell, that she was a friend of the family. The doorman called up. There was a long pause, then, "Ms. Torres says to send you up, 15th floor." The elevator ride felt like descending into uncertainty. Claire had no idea what she'd say to Lily, no idea if the girl would even want to see her, but she owed her this much, at least. The nanny, Miss Torres apparently, answered the door. She was younger than Claire expected, maybe 30, with kind eyes and the look of someone who'd been thrust into an impossible situation and was doing her best. "You're her," Miss Torres said. Not a question. "I am. The FBI said you might show up. They said to call if you did." "Are you going to?" Miss Torres studied her for a long moment. "Lily talks about you, about how you saved her in Chile. She's been asking if you're okay, if you're safe. She's 7 years old and she's worried about the woman who destroyed her father." She stepped aside. 5 minutes. Then I'm calling Agent Reeves whether you're gone or not." Claire walked into the apartment. It was smaller than Ethan's penthouse had been, but comfortable. Lily sat on the couch, coloring in a book, looking more put together than any 7-year-old should after everything she'd been through. "Hi," Claire said. Lily looked up. Her face did something complicated, fear and relief and anger all mixed together. "You came back." "I did. I wanted to see if you were okay." "Dad's in jail." "I know. I'm sorry. Ms. Torres says it's not your fault. She says Dad made bad choices and you just told people about them." Lily set down her crayon. "Is that true?" Claire sat on the couch, maintaining a careful distance. "It's complicated. Your dad did do bad things, but I also did bad things trying to expose him. We both made choices that hurt people, including you." "Why did you pretend to be his wife?" "Because I was angry. My brother died and I blamed your dad for it. So I spent years planning revenge. I became someone else so I could get close to him and destroy everything he'd built." Claire swallowed hard. "It was wrong. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't." Lily thought about this, her face serious. "My friend Emma's mom says revenge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Your friend Emma's mom is very wise. Did it work? The revenge?" Claire wanted to lie. Wanted to tell this 7-year-old that yes, revenge worked, justice was served, everything turned out okay. But Lily deserved better than comfortable lies. "No," Claire said. "It didn't work. Your dad's in prison, yes. But my brother is still dead, and I hurt people who didn't deserve it, including you. So I don't think revenge ever really works. It just makes more pain." "Then why did you do it?" Because I didn't know what else to do. I was so angry and sad and lost that revenge felt like the only thing that made sense. But I was wrong. Lily picked up her crayon again, adding purple to a flower that had been pure yellow. I'm mad at you for lying, for making Dad go to jail, for leaving me in Chile. You should be. I'd be mad too. But I'm also glad you saved me from those men. And I'm glad the FBI has the diamonds so they can punish the other bad people too. Lily looked up. Does that make me bad? Being glad and mad at the same time? Claire felt something break in her chest, the kind of breaking that wasn't destruction but release. No, sweetie, that makes you human. People are complicated. We can feel lots of things at once. It's one of the hardest parts about being alive. They sat in silence for a moment. Ms. Torres hovered in the doorway, watching the clock. Are you going to jail too? Lily asked. I don't know, maybe. I did a lot of illegal things, but I'm trying to make them right. How? By telling the truth, by helping the FBI find other bad people, and by apologizing to you. I'm sorry, Lily, for everything. You deserved a better stepmother. You deserved adults who protected you instead of putting you in danger. Lily nodded slowly. Then, unexpectedly, she stood up and hugged Claire. Just for a second, quick and fierce and complicated. I hope you don't go to jail, Lily whispered. I hope you get to be yourself again. Claire hugged her back, trying not to cry. Thank you. That means more than you know. Ms. Torres cleared her throat. Time's up. Claire stood, wiped her eyes, and walked to the door. She turned back one last time. Be good, Lily. Be better than your dad, and better than me. You can do that. I'll try. The elevator ride down felt lighter somehow. Claire stepped out into Tribeca's afternoon chaos, tourists and business people and delivery bikes weaving through traffic, and pulled out her phone. One new message from Agent Reeves. I got your email. Deal accepted. Report to the FBI field office in Manhattan tomorrow at 9 a.m. Bring nothing but yourself. We'll handle the rest. Claire looked up at the sky. Clouds were gathering again. More rain, probably. But for now, the sun was still visible. She'd spent 4 years being someone else. 4 years planning and lying and destroying. Now she was going to spend however long it took being herself again, learning who Claire Bennett was when she wasn't consumed by revenge. It wouldn't be easy. There would be testimony and trials and probably therapy. She'd have to face every person she'd hurt, every choice she'd made, every consequence she'd ignored. She'd have to rebuild a life from nothing, with a past that would never fully wash clean. But at least it would be her life, her choices, her name. Claire Bennett walked through Manhattan's streets, heading nowhere in particular, just existing in the space between her past and her future. She passed the building where Mark had worked, where he'd discovered the truth that got him killed. She passed the courthouse where Ethan's trial had concluded. She passed 1,000 anonymous faces living their anonymous lives. Tomorrow she'd go to the FBI. Tomorrow she'd start making amends. Tomorrow she'd begin the long process of becoming human again. But today, right now, she was just a woman, walking through New York City on a Tuesday afternoon. No fake identity, no revenge plot, no diamond full of secrets, just Claire, complicated and broken and trying to be better. It wasn't redemption. She didn't deserve that and probably never would, but it was something. And for the first time in 4 years, that felt like enough. The rain started again as she reached Washington Square Park. Claire tilted her face up, letting it wash over her, and smiled. Somewhere in the city, Lily was coloring. Somewhere, Ethan was in a cell paying for his crimes. Somewhere, Mark's grave was getting soaked by the same rain. And Claire was here, alive, free, herself. The woman who'd destroyed a billionaire, the sister who'd avenged her brother, the villain and hero and victim all at once. Just Claire Bennett,